Congregation, please be seated and open your prayer guides to the book of Revelations, Psalm 69.
I feel like my heart is being touched by Christ. I feel like my heart is being touched by Christ. I feel like my heart is being touched by Christ. I feel like my heart is being touched by Christ. Fire! Bless people!
Praise Jesus! Praise Jesus!
Fire! Bless people!
Praise Jesus! Praise Jesus! And now, it's time for us to give a little love back to God.
In my work, I use overload techniques to communicate and critique the authenticity of the documentary form. I use abstract images to help convey suggested meaning with ambiguity for effect and to amplify the technique using aggressive but indexically bonded soundtracks to communicate particular themes, issues, and attitudes related to the subject. Here are two examples from early experiments with this editing technique related to the punk subculture. My aim was to address the issue of historic absence of me, the producer of the work, while reconstructing the atmosphere, attitude, and ambience of the punk subculture in late 1970s Belfast.
Listen, Lord Punk, as
From these early experiments, I wanted to intensify the audience experience and narrative disclosure by means of overstimulation, to saturate the viewer with intended meaning, which complemented my ambition to fracture the indexical bond and the naive assumption of connectivity without intervention in documentary form. This connects with Ken Farrow's concept of documentary of force, where the form has aesthetic, artistic, and political potential through its means of construction and disclosure. The political ambition in my work corresponds with Heath and Mellencamp's concepts around hierarchy of discourses, where the audiovisual information is a contested space over time, where the priority is invested in a range of indexical bonding preferences, including the still image. Often in documentary work, this technique involves a grounded reading of the image through narrative voiceover, which is a constructed fictional device. Stella Bruzzi argues that the still image presents us with an invitation to interpret meaning and what I was interested in exploring was how to push this invitation to extremes through overstimulus gathered from elements of actuality placed within a hierarchy of cinematic discourses. The increasing amplification of this technique to saturate intended meaning through form rather than subject was a critical interventionist approach to help me deconstruct and examine the nature and characteristics of documentary work, where I was playing with indexicality and image bonding to produce new forms of moving image from still image information. Here are some examples. I believe this methodology presents a political and artistic strategy which seeks to challenge orthodox assumptions about the unmediated intervention in documentary reality construction, which itself instead offers a reflexive interpretation of the meaning created or presented. Here, I use only still image to construct a documentary narrative as a conversation about both the subject and form as a critical methodology based on Professor Des Bell's autocritical method, which involves reflexive interventions in ongoing media production work.
Yeah, if you take an example, I suppose of Seamus Heaney writes poems about digging, living in the country, growing up. That's although it doesn't represent the people who read the poetry, but it represents his life. It represents I suppose it would represent my father's life. It would represent my grandfather's life.
Would this history correspond with the lived experiences of people from industrial cities?
No, but they've got their they've got Charles Dickens to, I suppose, to reaffirm how they used to live in the same way.
Are we powerless to represent ourselves, as we tend to allow representations of our cultures to take certain form and our history of culture to be reaffirmed by particular people in particular ways?
Yeah, I agree. People to a certain extent give up their right to define their own cultures. They give up their right to define their identity. They seem to be more comfortable with allowing other people to do it for them. I don't go along with that, but it appears that quite a few people do. Culture, identity and representations are interlinked. I think it's a day-to-day process of negotiation, which is political because it's about definitions of power.
This autocritical model brought about some ethical challenges while producing documentary work on particular subcultures. In the project Modern Angels, I examined the body art scene in Belgium at the turn of the millennium and asked questions regarding the insider notion of the modern primitive. I also continued to explore the use of still image as a strategy which again helped overcome issues of historical absence while presenting a coherent narrative invitation to the audience regards my interpretation of known events and activities. An ethical challenge arose while recording intimate performance to an invited audience, which centered around my recording activity itself as the motivation for the event. I later used this experience in subsequent works, organizing a European tour so I could document and record an anarcho-ska band, Interterrestrials. Here's some examples from both.
And longevity of one's nails on tour.
You see, why use plectrums when Loctite will do the job?
I was born in the middle of the afternoon, in a horse-drawn wagon in the old age time. The big two-wheeler shook my bed. You can't stop here, the policeman said. Better get bored someplace else. Move along, get along, move along, get along. Go! Move! Shit! I was born in tatty lifting time, in an old boat tent in a tatty field. The farmer said, the work's so done, the time that you were moving on. Better get bored someplace else. Move along, get along, move along, get along, go. Move! Shit!
I think you could really call it like punk bands, but like the attitude of the bands over here was really like DIY, it was like everybody knew each other, everybody was supporting each other.
Why you always come unfair? Cause you can find a way to live. Your end is full of emptiness. The time when someone's turning free. You ask me what's the meaning of this service, but I don't give a fuck, the end is near. You think we're here, some kind of premise? Damn, it's not, I mean it's fear. You ask me what's the meaning of this freak show. The end is near and I don't want it now. You think we're here, some kind of premise? Damn, it's not, my biggest fear. Haters written all over your face. You want to fuck it out of this place. Completely lost inside your head. No time when someone's taking free. You ask me what's the meaning of this service, but I don't give a fuck, the end is near. You think we'll give some kind of premise? Damn, it's not, my biggest fear. You ask me what's the meaning of this freak show. The end is near and I don't want to know. You think we'll give some kind of premise? Damn, it's not, my biggest fear.
I also used the same image in different works to help create different meanings or overstimulus for different documentary narrative invitations. The indexicality of the still image is therefore rendered multi-interpretive under differing placements, contexts, and intended meanings. I would argue that placing the still image into another form brings associative historical meaning or preferred artistic narrative to these basic elements of actuality. Bill Nichols argues that meaning is infused during the secondary editing process, and this was part of my critical examination. However, I would counter-argue that the context has meaningful and impactful influence over the audience reading of a still image on its own or when used within other forms, and also when the moving image is presented as motionless, as I attempted here in Assembly Required.
Have you ever heard of the Buzzcocks?
I've never heard of them before.
Have you ever heard of the Buzzcocks?
No, I haven't. I don't know who they are.
Do you know a song called Ever Fallen in Love?
Nope.
You spend my natural emotion. You make me feel like I'm hurt. And if I start a commotion, I run the risk of losing you, and that's worse. Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone you shouldn't have fallen in love with? I can't see much of the future unless we find out what's to blame. What a shame. And we won't be together much longer unless we realize that we are the same. Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone you shouldn't have fallen in love with? You disturb my natural emotion. You make me feel under hurt and I'm hurt. But if I start a commotion, I'll only end up losing you, and that's worse. Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone you shouldn't have fallen in love with? Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone you shouldn't have fallen in love with? Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone? Ever fall in love with someone you shouldn't have fallen in love with? Ever fall in love with? Ever fall in love with someone you shouldn't have fallen in love with?
Finally, I would like to champion the idea that the use of the still image in the moving image, for me, formed part of a punk pedagogy, which drew upon fundamental necessities of bricolage when researching and gathering materials to produce a historical documentary work around particular subcultures. The absence of the documentary producer is filled with still image, graphics, associated materials to help construct the preferred meaning created around a particular subject in history. The use of still image was central in my work and still is, as I have now transferred this methodology into video essay as my preferred method of production, as an academic and creative practitioner. I will leave you with some of the overstimulation from my last project, Bloody Bloody Belgium.
Not being satisfied with everything around us, and having to in need for something to express yourself. So we went into music to express ourselves. The political scene was very right wing, like now. Didn't change so much actually.
The anarcho-punk thing, when I started the band XXX, I became very much aware of, my political beliefs and stuff. In the beginning, I was just, trying to make some music, have some fun, drink some beers. Then the anarcho thing came. I went to university, so we're talking somewhere 1984 now. So also 1984 at that point still had to happen. It was like we were in the beginning of the 80s. You have the George Orwell 1984 novel talking about some totalitarian environment, Big Brother.
And actually we were living that 1984 thing here in Kortrijk.